Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine a slow-motion scene from your own life. The room is quiet. The early morning light slips through the blinds, and for a brief second, everything feels peaceful. But then the alarm clock rings. That familiar sound cuts through the silence and pulls you out of the freedom of sleep and back into the routine of another day. You sit up in bed, and before your feet even touch the floor, there's already a weight on your shoulders. Not a physical weight, but something heavier. Responsibilities. Expectations. The invisible pressure of keeping everything together. You walk to the mirror. The face staring back at you looks older than you remember. Maybe you're in your 30s now, maybe older. You notice the subtle lines around your eyes, the marks left by late nights, long work days, and years of trying to build a stable life. You did everything you were told to do. You worked hard in school. You earned the degrees people said would guarantee success. You found a steady job, followed the rules, checked all the boxes society laid out in front of you. From the outside, it looks like you did everything right. And yet something inside feels strangely empty. Standing there in front of the mirror, a quiet question starts to rise in your chest. Why does it feel like something is missing? Why does it feel like your energy is slowly draining away, even though you're doing exactly what you were told would lead to a good life? If you've ever felt this way, take a deep breath for a moment, because the truth might surprise you. That exhaustion you feel is not proof that you failed. That quiet emptiness in your chest is not a personal flaw. In fact, those feelings may be signals from a deeper part of you, something within you trying to wake you up to a much bigger truth. But what if the exhaustion you feel every morning isn't a sign that something is wrong with you, but a signal that something inside you is trying to wake up? Because the truth is, many people spend their entire lives believing they are broken, when in reality they are simply living inside a system that was never designed for their deeper nature. Think about it for a moment. From the time we were kids, we were taught a very specific formula for life. Study hard, get good grades, find a stable job, work harder than everyone else, climb the ladder, build security, and repeat that cycle for the rest of your life. For some people, that path works well enough. But for many others, something inside quietly resists it. A small voice that whispers, there has to be more than this. And if you've ever felt that whisper, you're not alone. In fact, that feeling might be the first sign that you're beginning to see something most people never question. What if life on Earth is not just a random struggle for survival, but something closer to a game? Not in the trivial sense, but in the way a complex simulation or open-world game works. In every game, there's always a tutorial level at the beginning. That stage is designed to teach the player basic rules. Your abilities are limited. Your movement is restricted. You follow a narrow path that the system lays out for you. You don't have access to your full power yet. Now imagine something interesting. What if the structure of modern life functions in a similar way? School, career paths, social expectations, they can begin to look like a carefully designed tutorial phase. A system that teaches you how to operate within a certain framework, but also quietly limits how much of yourself you are allowed to explore. And when someone begins to feel suffocated by that structure, society often tells them something must be wrong with them. But what if the opposite is true? What if that discomfort is actually a signal that you're ready to move beyond the tutorial stage? Because here's the part most people never hear. The real measure of a human life may not be your job title, your bank balance, or how many people approve of you. Those things are useful in the physical world, but they don't define the deeper capacity of a human being. Your true potential might be measured in something far less visible: your awareness, your intuition, your ability to shape the direction of your own experience. Yet most of us were never taught how to use those abilities. It's almost like being handed the controls to a highly advanced spacecraft, but the only manual you were given explains how to ride a bicycle. So you keep pedaling harder, wondering why it still feels like you're not going anywhere. That quiet exhaustion you feel each morning might not be weakness. It might be the sound of something powerful inside you trying to move, while being forced to operate under rules that were never meant for it. And that realization changes everything. Because once you begin to question the structure you were placed inside, something interesting starts to happen. The moment you realize you may have been playing by the wrong rules, you begin searching for the real ones. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. Welcome to the Inner Code. If you've ever felt like life was meant to be more than just surviving the next week, then you're in the right place. Today we're going to look at a powerful idea, What if the limits you've accepted about yourself were never the real limits at all? What if they were simply part of the tutorial, and the real game hasn't even started yet? And the moment you begin to see life from that perspective, something inside you shifts. Because if the system you've been living inside is only the tutorial, then it means the real rules of the game were never fully explained to you. Most people move through life believing success is measured by money, status, or approval from others. But what if those are only surface metrics, numbers that matter inside the system, but not on the deeper scoreboard of existence? What if the universe is actually operating on a different set of principles altogether? Principles that quietly shape your experience, your growth, and even the direction your life begins to move. Imagine for a moment that beyond the noise of everyday life, there is a hidden framework. 5 fundamental laws that determine whether a person remains trapped inside the limitations of the system or begins to rise beyond them. These laws aren't taught in school, and they rarely appear in the conversations we have about success or achievement. Yet once you start to recognize them, the way you see your life begins to change in a profound way. Because suddenly, the struggles you once saw as obstacles begin to reveal themselves as signals, and the limitations you accepted about yourself start to dissolve. So in this video, we're going to explore those 5 hidden laws, 5 principles that can transform the way you understand the game of life itself. So let's begin with the first law. And to understand it, we have to start somewhere deep inside the human mind, somewhere older than civilization itself. Long before modern cities, before technology, before written history, human beings lived in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Every day could mean facing predators, extreme weather, or scarcity of food. In that environment, the brain developed a powerful system designed to keep us alive at all costs. Deep within the brain sits a small but incredibly influential structure often called the amygdala. Its job is simple: detect danger and trigger an immediate response. When it senses a threat, it floods the body with adrenaline and activates what we know as the fight or flight response. In ancient times, this system was essential. It helped our ancestors escape predators and survive harsh conditions. Without it, humanity might never have made it this far. But here's the strange part. The world changed, but the system didn't. Today, most people are no longer running from wild animals or struggling to survive in the wilderness. Yet the same survival program is still running in the background of our minds. And instead of reacting to predators, it now reacts to modern stress, financial pressure, career uncertainty, relationship conflict, social expectations. The brain doesn't know the difference. To your nervous system, a threatening email from your boss can trigger the same biological alarm that once protected our ancestors from a charging animal. And the moment that alarm is triggered, your entire system shifts into defense mode. Your thoughts narrow. Your body tenses. Your mind begins scanning for threats everywhere. You might feel the urge to protect yourself, to withdraw, to judge others, or to assume the worst about situations around you. And most people believe this reaction is simply part of life. But what if this survival program is also the very thing that keeps people stuck? Because when the mind is locked in survival mode, something important happens. Creativity shuts down. Intuition becomes quieter. Long-term vision fades into the background. All of your energy is redirected toward protecting yourself in the present moment. It's like a powerful computer being forced to run a single emergency program over and over again. The machine itself is capable of extraordinary things, but it never gets the chance to use that potential. This is why many people feel constantly drained even when they haven't physically exhausted themselves. Their nervous system is running survival code all day long. And the deeper consequence goes even further. According to modern research in neuroscience and psychology, emotional states influence how we interpret reality. When someone lives primarily in fear, stress, or resentment, their perception of the world becomes filtered through those emotions. They begin to notice more threats, more conflict, more limitations. Their attention becomes magnetized toward problems. And in a very real sense, the world they experience begins to mirror that internal state. This brings us to the first hidden law. The first law of mastering the game of life is learning how to move beyond survival mode. Not by ignoring difficulties or pretending challenges don't exist, but by recognizing that fear is not meant to be the driver of your life. Fear was designed as a temporary alarm system, not a permanent operating system. Yet millions of people unknowingly allow fear to guide their decisions every single day. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of losing security. And when fear becomes the dominant signal in someone's mind, it quietly shapes the direction of their life. They choose safe paths instead of meaningful ones. They protect themselves instead of exploring their potential. They build walls instead of building connection. But there is another state available to the human mind, one that operates on a completely different frequency. Instead of defense, it is based on openness. Instead of contraction, it creates expansion. Instead of fear, it begins with something far more powerful, compassion. Many ancient traditions and modern researchers alike have pointed to the profound effect of emotions like empathy, gratitude, and love. These states influence the body and brain in ways that are dramatically different from fear. Heart rate stabilizes. Stress hormones decrease. Cognitive flexibility increases. People become more creative, more resilient, and more capable of seeing possibilities instead of only threats. When someone learns to shift from fear into compassion, something remarkable happens. The same world that once looked hostile begins to look full of opportunity. The same challenges that once triggered panic begin to reveal lessons and growth. This doesn't mean life suddenly becomes easy. Difficulties still appear. Uncertainty still exists. But the way you move through those moments changes entirely. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin responding consciously. Instead of fighting the world, you begin interacting with it. This is why the first law is often misunderstood. People hear the idea of choosing compassion or love and assume it means weakness. But in reality, the ability to maintain compassion during difficulty requires tremendous strength. Anyone can react with anger or fear when things go wrong. It takes a deeper level of awareness to pause, breathe, and choose a different response. And that choice changes everything. Because the moment fear stops controlling your decisions, you reclaim something essential, your ability to shape the direction of your own experience. Think of it like changing the signal that your mind is broadcasting into the world. When fear is the signal, your attention locks onto problems and threats. But when compassion becomes the signal, your mind begins noticing possibilities, solutions, and connections that were invisible before. The external world may not have changed overnight, but your relationship with it has. And once that shift happens, the game itself begins to feel different. You are no longer moving through life as someone constantly defending against danger. Instead, you begin exploring it as someone who is actively shaping their path. That shift, from survival to awareness, is the doorway to everything that follows. Because the moment you stop letting fear run the system, you begin accessing parts of yourself that were always there, waiting quietly beneath the surface. Now here's where the next realization begins to change everything. Because even if someone learns to step out of pure survival mode, there is another illusion that quietly pulls people back into it again and again. An illusion so deeply embedded in modern culture that most people never even question it. It's the belief that life is a constant competition and that the world operates on scarcity. From an early age, we are taught to see the world as a limited arena. Limited opportunities, limited success, limited recognition. If someone else wins, it must mean someone else loses. And if you want to survive, you must compete harder than everyone around you. This belief quietly shapes the way people see each other. Coworkers become rivals. Friends become comparisons. Even strangers become potential threats to your place in the system. Think about how often people measure their lives this way. Who has the better job? Who makes more money? Who achieved more by a certain age? Entire identities become built around ranking ourselves against others. But here's the question very few people stop to ask. If everyone is constantly competing, why do so many people still feel exhausted and disconnected even when they win? Because beneath the surface, something deeper is happening. When a person believes they are fundamentally separate from everyone else, their entire nervous system shifts into defensive mode. Instead of seeing themselves as part of a larger system of connection, they see themselves as a single individual fighting against the world. And that mindset quietly drains an enormous amount of energy. Every conversation becomes strategic. Every relationship becomes conditional. Even success begins to feel fragile because it depends on staying ahead of someone else. But there is another way to understand the structure of reality. And strangely enough, modern science has begun pointing toward it in unexpected ways. In the field of quantum physics, researchers discovered a phenomenon that challenged many traditional assumptions about separation. It's called quantum entanglement. When two particles interact with each other, they can become linked in such a way that their states remain connected, even when separated by enormous distances. A change in one can instantly influence the other. Scientists still debate the full implications of this phenomenon, but one thing is clear. The universe may be far more interconnected than our everyday senses suggest. Now imagine applying that insight metaphorically to human life. What if the people around you are not simply separate competitors moving through isolated lives? What if, in ways we barely understand, human beings are part of a deeply interconnected system? When someone believes they are completely alone, competing against everyone else, they begin building walls. But walls don't only keep threats out. They also block connection, cooperation, and shared growth. This is why the second hidden law begins with a powerful shift in perception. The second law is learning to see beyond the illusion of separation. When someone truly understands this principle, the way they interact with the world changes dramatically. Instead of asking, "How do I defeat the people around me?" the question becomes, "How do we grow together?" Instead of constantly defending their position, they begin building relationships rooted in collaboration and trust. And interestingly enough, this shift often leads to greater success, not less. Because cooperation multiplies possibilities in ways competition rarely can. Think about some of the most innovative achievements in modern history. Scientific breakthroughs, technological revolutions, cultural movements. Almost none of them happened because a single person defeated everyone else. They happened because groups of people combined their knowledge, ideas, and creativity. Yet even beyond practical outcomes, something deeper begins to change inside the individual who understands this law. The constant tension of comparison begins to relax. The pressure to prove oneself slowly dissolves. Instead of constantly asking, "Am I ahead or behind?" a different question begins to emerge. How can I contribute? And that question shifts the direction of life in a profound way. Because when a person moves from competition to contribution, their identity changes. They stop measuring their value through external rankings and begin measuring it through the impact they create. This is where forgiveness also becomes an unexpected part of the equation. Many people carry resentment toward those who hurt them in the past. And from a purely emotional standpoint, that reaction is understandable. But holding on to resentment also keeps the mind locked in the same cycle of separation and conflict. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that harm never happened. It means choosing not to carry the emotional weight of that conflict forever. It's a way of freeing your own mind from the gravity of the past. When someone practices forgiveness, they aren't just releasing another person. They are releasing themselves. And the moment that release happens, something remarkable becomes possible. Instead of replaying old wounds, the mind becomes free to move forward. Energy that was once trapped in anger or bitterness becomes available for creativity, connection, and growth. This is why understanding the second law can feel almost like lifting a heavy armor you didn't realize you were wearing. For years, you may have believed you had to protect yourself from everyone around you. But once you see through the illusion of separation, something lighter begins to emerge. The world no longer looks like a battlefield full of enemies. It begins to look more like a network of relationships, possibilities, and shared journeys. And when you reach that point, a quiet sense of peace often follows. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you no longer feel like you're fighting the entire world alone. Instead, you begin to see yourself as part of something larger, a system where growth happens through connection, not isolation. But even after someone understands this second law, there is still another challenge waiting ahead. Because the world doesn't stop throwing unexpected events into our lives. Loss, change, uncertainty, sudden shifts in direction. And the real test is not whether we can avoid those moments, but how we respond when they arrive. That is where the third law begins. But even after someone begins to understand this deeper sense of connection, life still presents a challenge that no philosophy can avoid. Because the world is unpredictable, plans collapse. Opportunities disappear. Relationships shift. One day, everything seems stable, and the next, something unexpected changes the direction of your entire life. Almost everyone has experienced a moment like this. A job suddenly ends. A relationship you trusted breaks apart. A goal you spent years chasing slips out of reach. And in those moments, the human mind often reacts in the same familiar way. It resists. It tries to force reality back into the shape it expected. We replay the past in our minds, searching for the exact moment things went wrong. We ask ourselves questions that circle endlessly without answers. Why did this happen? What could I have done differently? Why now? And while these questions feel natural, they also reveal something important about the way the mind works. Because underneath all of that resistance lies a powerful assumption, the belief that life should unfold exactly according to the plans we created. From a young age, we are taught to believe that control is the key to security. Create a detailed plan. Follow the timeline. Achieve the milestones. If everything goes according to schedule, the future will be safe. But the reality of life rarely follows such precise instructions. The universe does not operate like a spreadsheet. It moves through change, uncertainty, and constant transformation. And when reality begins moving in a different direction than the one we expected, many people experience an enormous amount of psychological friction. They try to hold on to what is already gone. They continue investing time, energy, and emotion into situations that no longer support their growth. Psychologists sometimes refer to this pattern as the sunk cost fallacy. When we've invested years into something, whether it's a career path, a relationship, or a belief about ourselves, it becomes extremely difficult to let it go. Even when we sense that the path is no longer right for us, part of the mind insists that we must keep going simply because we've already invested so much. But here is where the third hidden law begins to appear. Because the ability to move forward in life is not determined by how tightly you hold on to the past, but by how gracefully you can adapt when the path changes. In nature, adaptability is often the true measure of strength. Consider something as simple as water. Water is soft. It has no rigid shape of its own. Yet over time, water can carve through mountains, reshape landscapes, and travel across the entire planet. When water encounters an obstacle, it doesn't resist the way a rigid structure would. It flows around it. If a path closes, it finds another direction. It adjusts, shifts, and continues moving forward. This ancient metaphor has appeared in many philosophical traditions because it captures a profound truth about resilience. Strength does not always come from force. Often, it comes from flexibility. When a person learns to adopt this mindset, something remarkable begins to happen during moments of change. Instead of seeing disruption as the end of the story, they begin to see it as a redirection. The loss of one opportunity becomes the doorway to another. The unexpected challenge becomes the catalyst for growth that would never have occurred otherwise. And interestingly, many people later realize that the moments they once feared most were actually the turning points that shaped their lives in the most meaningful ways. But reaching that realization requires a shift in perspective. It requires moving away from the constant question, "Why is this happening to me?" and replacing it with a more powerful one. What might this experience be teaching me? That question transforms adversity into information. Instead of fighting against reality, the mind begins to cooperate with it. Energy that was once spent resisting the present moment becomes available for creativity, problem-solving, and forward movement. In this way, the third law can be understood as the art of transforming difficulty into momentum. Not by denying pain or pretending challenges are easy, but by refusing to become trapped by them. When a person learns to adapt rather than resist, life begins to feel less like a series of battles and more like a dynamic flow of experiences. And within that flow, new opportunities often appear in places we never expected. But there is still another layer to this journey. Because adapting to change is only the beginning. The deeper transformation happens when a person begins to question not only how they respond to the world, but also how honestly they are living within it. And that realization leads us to the fourth hidden law. But adapting to change is only part of the journey. Because even if someone learns to flow with uncertainty, another question eventually begins to surface, one that many people spend years avoiding. A quiet but uncomfortable realization starts to appear. What if the life you've been building doesn't actually reflect who you truly are? Think about it. Throughout your life, you've probably played many roles. The responsible employee, the supportive partner, the dependable friend, the successful professional. Each role carries expectations, and over time we learn how to perform them well. We smile when we're expected to smile. We say the right things in the right places. We adapt ourselves to fit the environments we move through. And slowly, almost without noticing, something subtle begins to happen. The line between who we truly are and who we appear to be becomes blurred. At first, it seems harmless. After all, adapting to social expectations is part of living in any community. But when the gap between your inner reality and your outward behavior grows too large, maintaining that gap begins to require an enormous amount of energy. Imagine carrying several invisible masks with you every day. One for work, one for family, one for social media, one for the version of yourself you believe others want to see. Switching between those masks requires constant mental effort. You have to remember how you're supposed to act, what you're supposed to say, and which version of yourself you're presenting at any given moment. Over time, that effort quietly drains your internal resources. And this is where many people begin to feel something they can't easily explain, a deep sense of fatigue that doesn't come from physical labor. It comes from emotional fragmentation. Because the mind functions best when thoughts, emotions, and actions move in the same direction. But when those elements are constantly misaligned, the system begins to lose efficiency. It's similar to how a radio signal becomes distorted when interference is present. The message is still there, but it becomes unclear and unstable. In the same way, when your internal truth and external behavior move in different directions, the signal you send into the world becomes scattered. Opportunities feel inconsistent. Relationships feel confusing. And many people interpret this as bad luck or lack of clarity in life. But often, the deeper cause is far simpler. They are living too far away from their authentic self. This leads us to the fourth hidden law. The fourth law is the power of alignment. Living in a way where your thoughts, emotions, and actions are connected rather than divided. When someone begins moving toward alignment, something remarkable starts to happen. The constant tension of maintaining multiple identities begins to dissolve. Instead of performing a role, they begin expressing a truth. Instead of asking, "What do people expect from me?" the question becomes, "What feels real to who I actually am?" That shift may sound small, but it has enormous consequences. Because authenticity functions like a stabilizing force in human psychology. When your internal and external worlds begin to match, the energy that was once used to maintain appearances becomes available for creativity, clarity, and meaningful action. This is why some people appear unusually calm and confident, even during uncertainty. It's not because their lives are easier. It's because they are no longer fighting against themselves internally. They are moving in one direction rather than many. Of course, choosing authenticity is not always comfortable. In fact, it often requires letting go of certain environments or relationships that were built around an older version of who you used to be. Some people may not understand the change. Others may question it. But that is a natural part of growth. Every time you move closer to alignment, the structures that no longer fit your authentic direction begin to fall away. At first, that process can feel like loss. But over time, it creates space for something far more meaningful, connections and opportunities that resonate with who you truly are. This is one of the ideas we often explore here on the Inner Code. Because beneath all the noise of modern life, there is a deeper pattern quietly shaping the direction of our experiences. And when someone begins to understand that pattern, they start making decisions from a very different place. Instead of chasing external validation, they begin building a life that reflects their internal values. Instead of measuring success by comparison, they measure it by alignment. And the interesting thing is that when people live this way, the world around them often begins to respond differently. Opportunities appear that previously felt out of reach. Conversations become more meaningful. The path forward begins to feel clearer, not because life becomes predictable, but because the internal compass guiding those decisions becomes stronger. But even alignment is not the final piece of the puzzle. Because sooner or later, every person reaches a deeper question about the meaning of their journey itself. A question that quietly waits beneath everything we've discussed so far. If life is not simply about surviving, if it's not only about competing, and if it's not about pretending to be someone we're not, Then what is the purpose of this experience we call life? That question leads us to the fifth and final law. And this is where the final realization begins to unfold. Because during the entire tutorial phase of life, the system keeps repeating the same message. Success means accumulation. More money, more status, more recognition. The game appears simple. Collect as much as possible before time runs out. But if you look carefully at the deeper structure of existence, something surprising becomes clear. The moment a human life reaches its final breath, everything material resets instantly. Bank accounts stay behind. Titles fade away. Possessions disappear from the scoreboard of the physical world. You cannot carry a single physical object beyond the boundary of this lifetime. So the real question becomes unavoidable. If nothing material travels with us, what actually remains? This is where the fifth law reveals something extraordinary. The universe measures a life using a completely different currency. Not what you accumulated, but the frequency you cultivated and the light you shared with others. Every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, every idea that lifts another human being. According to many ancient spiritual traditions, those energetic imprints are recorded in what is often called the Akashic records, a kind of universal memory field that stores the experiences and evolution of every soul. In that sense, your life leaves behind an invisible signature, not a record of what you owned, but a record of how you expanded consciousness through love, courage, and contribution. And when someone truly understands this principle, their motivation begins to transform. Life is no longer about exhausting yourself, trying to gather more for the ego. Instead, it becomes about contribution, creation, and expansion. You give not because you are lacking, but because something inside you has become abundant. And the moment that shift happens, the entire game of life begins to look completely different. And now we arrive at the final layer of this journey. The moment where everything you have heard begins to come together into a single realization. Because once you understand the 5 hidden laws of the Earth game, something inside you begins to shift. The story you have been telling yourself about life begins to change. The struggles you once saw as punishments start to look like turning points. The people you once blamed begin to appear as unexpected teachers. For most of human history, we have interpreted life from a very limited perspective, the perspective of the character rather than the perspective of the player. From inside the character, everything feels random, unfair, chaotic. When betrayal appears, it feels like injustice. When loss arrives, it feels like the universe has turned against us. When plans collapse, we assume something has gone terribly wrong. But when you step back and view life from the wider perspective of consciousness, a very different picture begins to appear. Suddenly, the events of your life start to look less like punishment and more like catalysts. Each challenge becomes a doorway that invites expansion. Each difficult relationship becomes a mirror reflecting something that needed to awaken within you. The Persian poet Rumi once wrote a line that has echoed through centuries of spiritual understanding. The wound is the place where the light enters you. When you truly absorb the meaning of those words, something remarkable begins to happen. The resentment you carried for years starts to loosen its grip. The anger that once felt justified slowly dissolves. Not because the pain was insignificant, but because you begin to see that even the pain had a purpose. Many spiritual traditions describe the idea that before entering this physical world, souls choose experiences that will help them grow. Imagine for a moment a place beyond time and space, a field of pure awareness where souls gather before beginning a new life. In that place, everything is light, clarity, and love. There is no conflict there, no loss, no uncertainty. And because everything is already perfect, there is very little opportunity for expansion. Growth requires contrast. Light becomes visible because darkness exists beside it. Courage appears only when fear is present. Forgiveness becomes meaningful only when betrayal has occurred. From this perspective, life on Earth begins to look like something very different from what we once believed. It is not a prison. It is a stage. A place where consciousness enters form in order to explore experience, emotion, and transformation. Some traditions describe this process through the idea of soul agreements. Imagine standing in that field of awareness surrounded by souls who care deeply about your evolution. You say to them, "In my next life, I want to learn compassion. I want to understand forgiveness at the deepest level. But once you enter the physical world, you will forget everything. Someone would have to play the difficult role. Someone would have to challenge you, push you, perhaps even break your heart so that your awareness could expand beyond the limits of the ego. And in that moment, another soul steps forward and says, I will do it. I will play the role that helps awaken you. From the human perspective, those moments look like betrayal or hardship. But from the perspective of the soul, they become catalysts for transformation. When this understanding settles deeply into the heart, something extraordinary begins to happen. The emotional armor you built around yourself begins to fall away. The anger that once defined parts of your story starts to fade. And in its place, a new emotion quietly appears: gratitude. Not gratitude for the pain itself, but gratitude for the awakening it made possible. Suddenly, the people who once looked like enemies appear as unexpected allies in the evolution of your consciousness. The storms you once feared begin to look like forces that cleared the path ahead. At that moment, the old structure of the 3D game begins to lose its grip on your mind. You are no longer reacting to life from fear, blame, or victimhood. Instead, you begin to move through the world with the awareness of a creator. You become calmer, clearer, more centered. Your presence itself begins to influence the environments around you. Because consciousness operating from coherence naturally reorganizes the field around it. And this is where the 5 laws finally reveal their deeper purpose. The first law teaches you to rise above survival fear and choose love as your highest frequency. The second law dissolves the illusion of separation and reminds you that cooperation and forgiveness reconnect you to the greater field of life. The third law shows you how to adapt like water, transforming obstacles into movement instead of resistance. The fourth law reveals that authenticity aligns your inner state with the reality you wish to create. And the fifth law reminds you that the true legacy of a human life is not measured by accumulation, but by contribution. Not by what you collected, but by the light you brought into the world. When all 5 of these principles begin working together, life no longer feels like a battlefield. It begins to feel like a creative arena, a stage where consciousness experiments with courage, compassion, creativity, and awareness. The storms that once terrified you become teachers. The uncertainty that once paralyzed you becomes possibility. The Earth game itself begins to transform from something you were struggling against into something you are consciously participating in. And before we close this journey, there is one final step. Not a ritual, not a belief, but a simple declaration of identity. If something in this message resonated with you, go down to the comments and write this one sentence: I reclaim my power as the creator. That single line may seem simple, but it represents a powerful shift in perspective. The moment you write those words, you are no longer identifying with the role of the victim inside the story. You are acknowledging that your awareness, your choices, and your energy have always been part of shaping your reality. And if this message spoke to something deeper within you, make sure to subscribe to the Inner Code so we can continue exploring the deeper mechanics of consciousness, reality, and human awakening together. Because the purpose of this channel is not just to explain ideas, but to help people remember something they may have forgotten for a long time. You were never meant to be trapped inside the game of life. You were meant to learn the rules, understand the system, and eventually become one of the players who helps rewrite it.